Hello, this is Angela from Natural Living Alchemy. Welcome to my channel. In today's video, we are going to be baking a basic sourdough bread, and this recipe is going to make 2 loaves. Now, I will be showing you how you can shape the boule or round shape, as well as my personal favorite, this oval or Batard shaped loaf. Now, in future videos, I'm going to be showing you different methods of inclusions that you can use, as well as next week, I'm going to be sharing a pumpkin sourdough recipe just in time for Thanksgiving. Canadian Thanksgiving, at least. This particular loaf is actually one that I just pulled out of my freezer last night, just so I had a little loaf of bread to show you what we would be making. But I will definitely go over different storage suggestions in it's usually notes and substitutions, but we're going to be doing notes and suggestions portions of this video, so stick around for then to see different storage options. So for my starter, I have used Sandy. She was the San Francisco sourdough starter that I revived with you last week. Now, you can definitely purchase a dehydrated starter off of Amazon. You could purchase them off of Etsy. I plan in the new year having some listed on my website, so that would be another place that you could find them. And actually next month I will be showing you how you can actually just make your own from scratch if that's what you want to do. But you can use absolutely any kind of sourdough starter for this recipe. In just a moment, I will be going over a couple important terms that you do need to know about that you will come across in your sourdough journey. I'm going to share some suggestions on water, different types of flours. We're going to talk about that. And then I'm going to be sharing the equipment that you're going to need. Keep in mind, you don't need every single piece of equipment I'm going to share. Some of this will just make things easier, but they are not non-negotiables. There's only a couple of things that you have to have. So if you do find that any of the things that I'm suggesting for alternatives, if you don't want to go out and buy everything, if you come up with something better, go ahead and share that in the comments and let's just help each other out. These are just some of the things that I've used while I was gathering all of my different tools. Now, the first term that I want to talk about with you is Levain, and that's what this is. So a Levain is a single-use leavening agent that is used to bake bread. Our particular Levain is made of a mixture of sourdough starter, flour, and water. Now, some do include small amounts of sugar, but we are not going to be including that in our recipe today. We will save that for future ones. Now, a Levain does differ slightly from a sourdough starter. A sourdough starter is just a mixture of wild yeast and beneficial bacteria that is just made up of flour and water. Now, a starter can be used to bake bread, it can be used to make a Levain, it can be discarded and refreshed, and essentially kept indefinitely with proper care. So our sourdough starter, we would just get rid of a little bit of discard and feed it again and continue using it. This, the Levain, is something that we've mixed up with it's just a single use. Now, our next term that I want to talk about is called Autolyse. Now, this is just what happens when we mix only the flour and the water together and then let it rest for a specific amount of time. Generally at least 30 minutes, but I've seen it all the way up to 12 hours. So just keep in mind that during this step, we are allowing the water to fully hydrate the flour, and different brands of flour will absorb water at different rates. During this phase, certain enzyme activity increases, and these enzymes begin to break down the gluten and the proteins, and it helps create a more expendable dough. While other enzymes are in there breaking down starches into sugars, and that is going to feed the yeast during fermentation. Is this a necessary step? I don't know. I really don't know. I have seen recipes call for this step and others that don't. I have seen other channels also confuse Fermentolyse with Autolyse. I'll talk about what that means in a second. But I have noticed that when I do this step, my loaves do turn out and they just taste better than if I don't do this step. But hey, try it out for yourself and see what happens. But I just find spending this little bit extra time in the beginning definitely pays off at the end. So in order to do this, what we are going to do is we will need a bowl. and we are going to need a scale. Now, a scale is your non-negotiable piece of equipment. You need it in order to bake bread, especially sourdough, when we are working in weights, not measurements. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're just going to get our autolysing started, and it's going to be able to get itself going, and then I'm going to go through the rest of the information I have to share, and then we're going to get to baking. So what you will do is, in a bowl on a scale, you're going to make sure that your scale is on the unit of measurement of grams, because that's what we use, and that it is zeroed out. So we're just going to start by putting 1,000 grams of bread flour into our bowl. All right, so that is actually all of the flour that is going to be going into this recipe. So we are just going to get the flour out of the way. And then, forgot my bread whisk. So then what you're going to do after you have your flour in your bowl, make sure that you are hitting tare and you're zeroing everything out again. And then we are going to add 600 grams of water into our bowl. Now, don't worry, I will be going over the recipe and all of the measurements again when it's time to start mixing everything together. So for now, we are just going to turn off our scale, and we are going to put it to the side. And we are going to need bowl scraper as well. I have these two different styles. I personally prefer this one over this one, and that's only because when it comes to cleaning off of your hands, I find that if you use kind of the little bit of a sharper end of this, it's not going to cut you, it's not that sharp, but it will help kind of scrape everything off and that you don't end up wasting dough. But, well, okay, let me just move this loaf out of the way. Okay, perfect. So what we are going to do is I'm going to throw a towel under here. Not a necessary thing, but sometimes when we get to mixing things up, the dough sticks to the bowl and slams back down. I just want it to be a little bit quieter so it's not going to hurt your ears while I'm recording this video. So once you have your flour and your water in your bowl to autolyse, all you'll need to do is we're just going to start to mix the dough together. When it is no longer possible to really stir with our whisk, we are then going to switch to our hands. Okay? And then after everything, I'm just going to wash them, and then I will come back because it gets a little bit messy at this point, but it's kind of fun. So let's mix this up. So now, as you can see, we are pretty shaggy. So we also have a lot of unabsorbed flour. So we are going to work all of that in during this autolyse stage. So what I'm going to suggest you do, you take your bowl scraper. Once you have mixed everything in with your whisk and it's no longer mixing in, you're going to scrape all of the flour off the side of the bowl. You're just going to get your hands in there, and you're just going to start mixing to fully absorb all of the flour in the water. So now we've gotten all of our water and our flour mixed together. There's no dry bits of flour left. Make sure to check underneath your dough, just at the very, very bottom of the bowl. Sometimes the flour hides there. But as you can see, it's still fairly shaggy. It's supposed to look this way. It will not become smooth for a while. But if you just look, we're starting to build a little bit of strength in here. Okay, now I'm just going to wash my hands, and then I will get to sharing the rest of these terms that you need to know while we let our Autolyse rest and become fully hydrated. And it will take approximately 30 minutes according to our recipe. Okay, now we're all clean again. Once you have this all mixed together, you are just going to put a lid on it, and we are just going to set this to the side for now. Now I'm also going to take note of what time it is, because I'm going to share another one of my little secrets with you in a moment. So this, okay. So I want this for 30 minutes. Another term that you might come across is Fermentolyse. Now I have seen Autolyse and Fermentolyse be used interchangeably, but they are not. So as we just learned, Autolyse is just putting our flour and our water together, mixing it up and letting it rest. Fermentolyse is when we are adding our water, our flour, and our sourdough starter together, no salt. That will be added later. So those three ingredients will, when mixed together in the beginning, will help kickstart the fermentation process. And then once you add the salt, it begins to strengthen the gluten and it slows down the fermentation. The Fermentolyse process should be no longer than 30 minutes. And if it is left for longer, it may result in overproofing when bulk fermentation is complete. So what's bulk fermentation then? Well, bulk fermentation is the initial stage of dough fermentation, where the dough is allowed to rise in a single mass after mixing. Now, this is also going to be the most challenging stage for you to conquer, as this is where things can go horribly, horribly wrong. You can have the perfect recipe mixed up wonderfully, but it's at your bulk fermentation where we are maybe watching the time, not the dough. And things can either go too far and it is over fermented, or not fermented long enough and then it is underproofed. Now it is during bulk fermentation where the yeast and the beneficial bacteria start to develop the flavor, the strength, as well as the volume of the dough. Now this does take several hours at room temperature. So what I'm going to suggest that you do is you learn how to read the dough, not the clock, when working with sourdough. And I'm definitely going to be sharing some tips for things to look out for. We do not want to rush this stage, as this is going to determine the final crumb of the loaf. Now, if you do find that you have gone over on your bulk fermentation and it is actually overproofed, you can then make focaccia. Now, all you would do then is just dump your dough into, I usually use a glass pan, flatten it down, pour some oil over top, kind of stick your fingers in there and get it all dimply. I like to sometimes add different spices. I've just used Italian seasoning to make an Italian one. You could sprinkle cheese. I've used blueberry and lemon. Really, you can use whatever it is that you want. But that is going to be what you will need to do if you end up overproofing your dough. But I'm going to show you some things to look out for so that that hopefully doesn't happen. The final term that I want to go over with you is crumb. Now, crumb is just meaning the texture and the structure of the interior of the bread. It can be described as either opened or closed. So open has large, even holes, and this is typically a sign of good fermentation, and closed is denser with fewer air pockets. Now, if you want to check out the I will have the written blog article linked in the description box below this video, and in there I actually have a crumb chart that you can check out. I didn't make it up myself, but it is one that I use, and I actually have a couple other things that you can download if you do check out that blog. And one is going to be the baker's notes that I'm talking about in a moment, and then I also do have a bulk fermentation time chart that is an approximation that you can go by. It's not necessarily gospel, but it will help. And bulk fermentation has a lot to do with the temperature of your room, but we'll talk about that later. Now let's speak on the different types of water that you can use. So there's 4 main ones, and if there's any other ones that I haven't listed, feel free to throw that in the comment box below this video and help me out. So you could use tap water, simple. Now, leaving tap water on the counter for 24 to 48 hours in an open container with no lid will help the chlorine evaporate, but it won't necessarily do much for other contaminants that might be in your water. So if tap water is all you had to use and you weren't really sure about what was in it, you could just boil it and then cool it down to reduce the contaminants in that way. Spring water. This is typically mineral rich and free from harmful chemicals. You could use filtered water. Now this could be coming right out of a bottle or just out of like a pitcher with a filter on it. Or maybe your fridge has like a water filter on it. You can use that too. And lastly, you could use well water, which is what I happen to be on and I use for all of my bakes. And I have noticed that, at least with my particular water, I was just using spring. Things got a lot better when I just started using just the well water. But you would need to test yours and just see if it is going to be helpful or if it's going to hinder your loaf. And the way that you would honestly test it, use it in a loaf and bake it. See how you like it. See if it turns out the way that you were wanting or expecting, especially if you've made it using other waters. Now, we don't want to use distilled water or anything that has been purified by reverse osmosis. We need some of those minerals to be present in the water. They are very beneficial to this process. Now, with that being said, if for whatever reason distilled water is the only clean water that you have available to you, just consider adding a pinch of salt or even just a little bit of mineral water into that water and then just using it that way. See how it works out for you. Flours. What is the best flour you can use? Well, I'm just going to let you know, for this particular recipe, you are going to just need bread flour. So bread flour just has a higher protein content than all-purpose flour. But if all-purpose flour is the only flour that you have, use that. It will also work. Now, I have seen, okay, let's try to figure out how to say this without being offensive to anyone. But a lot of us have turned into some ingredient snobs. Now, I'm going to just say use the best flour that you can get. But what does that mean? Well, let's say hypothetically, the best flour that you can find happens to be all organic and it was stone ground by a monk at the foot of a sacred river at a pyramid in Peru. Okay, cool, use that flour. But if the best flour that you can get just happens to be your non-organic generic house brand, use that. I'm not going to tell you that you have to use this brand of all organic or else you can't bake bread. That's a little bit ridiculous. Because, well, what happens if you're somebody, for example, single parent on maybe some government assisted programs and you can't afford the fancy organic flours? I'm not going to tell you that you can't make bread anyways based on what you can get. So my rule on this is just use the best flour that you can find and that you have available to you. Okay, enough of that rant. Our last thing that I want to talk about, and you can grab a copy of this from the blog article. I'm going to see where else I'm going to try to put it. If you don't want to use mine, make up your own. But they are baker's notes. So this is how I get consistent and better each loaf that I bake, is by writing it down. So on here we have the name of the recipe, the date, how much it makes. There's a little spot if you want to rate your dough or the recipe or whatever, you can do that there. Now, some important things to fill out on here if you know the information. Desired dough temperature. Now, I will be getting into this in greater detail at a later time, but we do want everything to be at 78 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's just going to give us, if it's warmer, it's going to go faster. If it's cooler, it's just going to go slower. That's all. So there's a spot where you can write your Levain ingredients, you can write your recipe ingredients, and then you're going to start writing all of your times on here. Okay, so I made my Levain last night at 9 p.m. This morning, when I finished my Autolyse process, was 9:50. I want to make sure that that's going to sit for at least 30 minutes. Okay, and then there's a time for when you mix it, when you're going to put your bulk fermentation begins, filling out times for each of your stretch and folds, and basically all of the steps that you will need to do in order to bake this bread. You do not have to use baker's notes, but I just think it is a really, really good idea. But enough about all of that. Let's get baked. Okay. So anyway, let us go over the ingredients, or not the ingredients, the equipment. Okay, we're going to go over all of the equipment that you're going to need. I'm going to give you some suggestions, and if you don't like those suggestions, you can just use different things. Okay. So our first thing is going to be your kitchen scale. As I've already mentioned, that is a non-negotiable. Okay. So next, you're going to need a bowl for mixing. So this can be absolutely anything. I'm using glass because it's a lot easier to see through, so you can observe your dough. And plus, I wanted it to be easier for anybody watching this video to be able to see what's going on in the bowl. So if it's clear, it's a bonus. But if you don't have a clear bowl, you can still proceed. I have seen people just use clear plastic, like Rubbermaid containers. I'm sure they were probably food safe, right? To mix all of their stuff. That's fine. You just need something that is going to hold all of your dough. Then, bench scrapers. So these are the two different ones that I have. I happen to prefer this one a little bit over this one, simply because of the way that this little handle fits in my hand is a little bit better, but both of them work. If you don't have a bench scraper, okay, we'll just use something else that you're going to be able to pick up your loaf with. Use a metal spatula. Another thing, though, you can do with your bench scraper is after we're done, and there's going to probably be little bits of dough left on your counter or your table surface, literally scrape your bench with your bench scraper, and it gets really, really easy to clean up. Okay, so now I've already talked about we're going to need some bowl scrapers. If you don't have bowl scrapers, you could just use a hard-sided spatula. You just need something that is just going to literally scrape the sides of your bowl. Okay? So, what else do we need? We will need some bread lambs. I don't really know if it's pronounced lamb or lame. Whatever. We'll call them lambs just to sound less offensive. So, the two different styles that I have is this one with a handle, and then I have this little guy that I've actually just taken, and because it comes with the razor blade like that, if you just cut the one corner and the other corner, you end up with something like this, and this can just make different designs in the top of your dough when it is time to score. If you do not have either of these particular tools, you're just going to use a small knife. All you need to do when you are scoring is you're going to need your implement to go in about 1/2 inch at a 45-degree angle. Okay? So just a small paring knife will work for that. Okay. Just put these back in here for now. One of these little things, this is not necessary, it's just fun. So what this little thing does is when it is time to sprinkle the flour, you just scoop it in and you can just sprinkle the flour on wherever you need it to go. If you don't have this, you can just grab the flour and sprinkle it with your fingers. That works perfectly. Okay, shower caps or any type of plastic covering that you can put over your bowls or your bannetons later. If you don't have this, this will work. It's just cling wrap. You just need something to put over the top so that it doesn't get all dried out. Now, I want you to keep in mind, this is not in the order in which you would be using these things. So, next, let us talk about, you're going to need either some silicone bread slings, if they come in both the Boule and the Batard shape. If you don't have these, all you would do is get a piece of oven-safe parchment paper. I have some that isn't oven-safe, so make sure that yours is, and you would just rip off a large piece and then just use it like that. Now, one thing that I do want to mention, if you are out shopping for these silicone slings, check the heat rating on them. So these ones are safe up to a 500-degree oven. Some of the other ones that I saw are only up to 4. Now, most recipes for baking bread that I have come across are at least at 425, if not 450. So just make sure that your equipment can withstand the high temperatures that we are going to be cooking with. Okay. You are going to need proofing baskets or bannetons. Okay, so we have our 2 different shapes here. We have our Boule and we have our Batard one. Some of these come with these little covers. Not all of them do. Some I've seen different, I think it's some type of pulp that it looks kind of like a cardboard to me. Those are supposed to work wonderfully. But if yours has a cover, just make sure that you put your cover on. Now, I don't know how everybody else does theirs, but I honestly just throw mine in the wash. I don't hand wash them. I just put them in with my towels and I hang dry them. I make sure that I generally don't use fabric softener or bounce or anything like that. So really make sure that you aren't using fabric softener on here. Okay? But yeah, you can just throw them in the wash and hang to dry. If you do not have these or don't want to use them, you are going to use a bowl with a clean dish towel inside. That's it. I've also used like a colander with a towel kind of lining it. Yeah, get inventive. Sourdough doesn't know what container you're going to have it in. It just needs to be kept in a container for shaping purposes. So you're also going to want to make sure that we have a baking rack and that we have high, good quality oven mitts, because these things that we are working with get very, very hot. Okay, so now we are going to talk about your cooking vessel. So this is the one that I use. This is just, it's just a Dutch oven from Cabela's, I believe. Yeah. So what I do is I use this one on the bottom. And then this is just how I put the lid over top. And I will just, this is how I'm going to bake all of my bread. I actually bake both different types of the loaf in this container because this is the one that I have that works the best. Now, another option that you do have for Dutch ovens is you could use a regular Dutch oven. Now, personally, I have had not the best luck using this style of Dutch oven. I think part of the problem is this is only a 5-quart. It's not quite big enough. So if you are wanting a Dutch oven like this, I'm going to suggest you get at least a 6, if not a 7-quart, to make sure that there is enough room. Because although the pumpkin one is adorable, what ends up happening in here is where the indents kind of are, I end up with these really, really weird white spots on my loaf. I also noticed, because this is an enamel one, I need to do it at a lower temperature than my cast iron one. Okay, even though this is cast iron, it still has the enamel coating on it. That does make a difference, and I've just found that these ones cook a little bit slower. But use whatever you have, use whatever you want. This is just the things that I prefer to use. This is what works for me, but something else might work better for you, and based on what you have and things along that nature. So there is two more things. It's not necessarily required equipment, it's just things that are useful to have. Oh, actually, a digital thermometer is really helpful to have, because we will need to know when our bread will be baked when it reaches 205 degrees. So this is a really good way to tell. And then the last thing here, rice flour. This is not a necessary ingredient, okay? You don't need rice flour. However, rice flour is a really good flour to use when you're sprinkling inside your bannetons, because the rice flour doesn't absorb into the sourdough the same as if you were using all-purpose just to dust your loaves with the flour. But use whatever you have, it's fine. If you don't have rice flour, you can just sprinkle it with regular all-purpose or even bread flour, whatever you have. You don't need to make it difficult. Okay, so the night before you are ready to bake, you're gonna build your levain. So in order to do that, you're going to grab a jar and you're gonna throw it on your scale. Now, I love these little weck jars. I guess they're not really that little. I think this holds like 7 or 850. If you want these jars, they are about, for 2 off of Amazon, you're looking at $30. I went to Canadian Tire, it's called, store local to me, and I picked up 6 for 40 bucks. Look around. Amazon is not always the cheapest place that you're going to find these things, although it is convenient. Anyway, so you're going to put your jar on your scale, turn it on, make sure it's on grams. You're going to go ahead and put 10 grams of your sourdough starter in your jar. Make sure you hit tare, and then you're going to add 100 grams of your bread flour that you're going to be using and 100 grams of water. And you're going to stir those together until no dry flour remains. And then you're just going to put it in a warm spot and leave it for 10 to 12 hours. Now, this particular ratio that we are using is a 1 to 10 to 10. So that means that we are going to have 10 times as much flour and water as we do starter. So if you were wanting to make this in the same day and you weren't necessarily wanting it to sit the 10 to 12 hours, you could just do a 1 to 1 to 1 ratio, making sure that you are mixing up enough, because we will require 210 grams of starter. So once that is mixed up, let's just move. No, actually, we will require this. Okay. So now let's start mixing our things together. So we've already done our Autolyse step, which was mixing 1,000 grams of bread flour with 600 grams of water, and we stirred that until no dry flour remained. So we've thrown a cover on it and we let it sit for it's been about 30 minutes, just a little bit over, and that's okay. We want to sit within that 30-minute to an hour range, because that's about as how long I've left this one sit before. It was up to an hour and it was fine. Okay, I haven't tried it out any longer than that. So now that we have our Autolyse process done, I want to show you something. So you saw how stretchy it was when we first mixed it, but look at it now. So we don't want to tear it, but we're definitely building a lot of the gluten in there, and that is exactly what we want to do. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to fill out my sheet, because we are at 10:20, and this is when I'm going to start mixing everything together. So we are going to put our bowl back on top of our scale. Okay. And then we are going to add our salt. So this particular recipe calls for 20 grams of salt. So what I do is I will just sprinkle the 20 grams directly on top of our flour and water mixture. So that is all of the salt that we will require. We will just move that out of the way. Oh my goodness, look at how bubbly this is on the top. So what I'm going to do, it smells so good. So I'm just going to actually write, because there's a spot on here for what my starter temperature is. Okay, so once you have your salt in your bowl over top, you're going to add water. Now, we are going to be adding potentially water twice. So you're going to start by adding 30 grams of water now. So let's just do that. Just right over top of our salt and our Autolyse. Okay, and we are just going to use this amount of water for now. Once we have everything mixed up, we are then going to evaluate if you need to add up to the last 30 grams of water that this recipe can call for. Now, I've made this enough that I know, based on the humidity in my house, based on the brand of flour that I use, which is just Robin Hood, nothing special. I know that this is going to be enough water, okay? But yours might be different. So we will definitely check that out then. So you're gonna now grab your starter after you've hit 0 on your scale, and we are going to add 210 grams of our Levain. I just like to give her a little stir first. Oh, perfect. Okay. So I do like to mix up a little bit extra when I am making my Levain, just to ensure that there might be some stuff left in the jar that you can't get. We want to make sure that we do have our 210 grams in here. Now, if for whatever reason you mix this up and, oh no, I only have 205 grams of Levain, we ended up losing too much when we were stirring it, that's okay. You can definitely just use that little bit less that you have. It might just take a little bit longer. If you end up putting maybe 5-10 extra grams of your Levain in here, it just might make things go a little bit quicker. It's not going to be the end of the world if you do end up adding a little bit extra or not end up having enough. So we are going to just move this out of the way. Now we are going to grab our towel again. And what we are going to do is we are going to begin by mixing everything in. And when you feel everything is just nicely incorporated, we are then going to start strengthening the dough by just turning it over on itself. But first, we're going to mix it up. So, your best friend when you are working with sourdough dough is water. Water is going to help you. Not to necessarily add more water in here, but by using wet hands, it actually does help the dough stick to your hands less. Even when we're going to be going into the shaping of this dough, I don't put flour down on the surface. I just use damp hands, okay? So we are just gonna wet our hands first, and then just getting in there, and we are just going to just squeeze everything together until it starts to just nicely mix in, and you no longer feel any salt. All of your water has been incorporated, as well as your starter. Now remember to just scrape the sides of your bowl periodically during this process, just to make sure that you don't leave behind any bits of our ingredients. So let's get mixing. So I would say that we are mixed in together. I no longer feel any bits of salt. There's no water sitting at the bottom of the bowl. Okay, and all of our starter is feeling like it is incorporated throughout. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do two different processes. One is optional, but I find it very effective to build strength. So we're going to first off start by just turning the dough onto itself for 5 minutes. And then after we have done that for 5 minutes, I'm going to do a couple different rounds of slap and folds, different than stretch and folds, okay? But I'll show you what we do when we get there. So for now, we are just going to pick this mixture up and just turn it on itself for 5 minutes. Now, if you need to take a break, because I'm going to suggest that you do all of this by hand, we're not going to use a mixer. If your arms need a break, that's fine. As long as you have been doing it for 5 minutes, it could take you 10 minutes to do the 5 minutes of folding the mixture on. That's fine. Just do what you can. I'm personally recovering from a frozen shoulder. We have finally defrosted. Exciting to be able to lift your shoulder over your head after not being able to do it for 2 years, but it does get sore pretty easily. So feel free to just take breaks as needed, but just make sure that you have done it for 5 minutes. Let's go. Just be sure when you are turning it on itself that you do just give the bowl just a little bit of a turn every now and then. Once you have everything mixed up to this point, you're going to determine if you want to add that other up to 30 grams of water. Okay, I think that mine is okay. It is wet enough. Keep in mind that the sourdough dough is just sticky. It's very, very sticky throughout most of this process. Okay, so don't be expecting that to go away ever, really. So once we're here, and if you notice, it's starting to look kind of stringy. You can notice when you're pulling it, there's kind of all these little strings that are showing up. Those are literally just your gluten strands. Now, during the stretch and fold process, as well as the slap and folds I'm going to show you in a minute, help to organize those gluten strands so they all start facing the same way. So we are going to just move our notes out of the way. And I'm just going to move this for now because I won't need it until I'm doing my stretch and folds. So what you'll do is just take your bowl scraper. You're going to literally scrape it out of the bowl. So to do your slap and folds, you're just going to you can do it in the bowl. I just find it a little bit easier to just do it right on the countertop. Plus, I think it'll be easier for you to kind of see it if it is just on the counter and not in the bowl. So what we'll do now, I'm a little bit rough with my dough. I don't really baby it until closer to the end when it's time to shape after the bulk fermentation is complete. So we're just going to dump out our dough. So what you're going to do is you're going to dampen your hands. I just have a bowl of just regular clean water here. I mean, as if you'd use dirty. I just took it out of my tap. So then with your damp hands, I like to kind of just rub it so my whole hands are wet. You're going to go under your dough. You're going to pick it up and you're going to slap her back down. And you kind of want the ends to just go under themselves. Then I like to go pick it up, turn it, slap. And then I just like to do this for just a couple rounds for a few minutes until things start to get a little bit more cohesive. This is an optional step, but I do find it is definitely worth it at the end. So just, and fold. So there, I think that that's enough. We are kind of in definitely more of a ball shape. Not that that is necessary. I just like how it starts to go like this. So then we are going to take a clean bowl. You could certainly just use this one, but as you can see, I've gotten it pretty gross. So then just grab your, let's move this out of the way. Just grab the bench scraper, scrape it all up, and then just put it in your bowl. If the top of my hand would have, or if my hand would have been wet, it wouldn't have quite stuck like that. So what we are going to do now is we are going to take note of the time. It is 10:45. This is when my bulk fermentation timing officially begins. Okay? So what we are going to do is you want to put a cover on your dough and you are going to allow this to rest for 30 minutes. So what we're going to do is you're going to set 1 to 2 timers depending on how you want to do this. If you're doing your baker's notes, you don't need to set the second timer, but you're going to set the first one for 30 minutes because after 30 minutes, we're going to come back here and we're going to do our first set of stretch and folds. Okay, and we're going to do 3 sets of those at 30, 60, and 90 minutes. At that third set, we are going to determine if we want to do another set of them or not. I find we usually can stop around that third set of stretch and folds. Okay? So, like I meant before about the bench scraper, I have some dough here. Literally, just scrape the bench, and it is easy to clean up. All right. So I am going to see you back here in 30 minutes for us to do our first round of stretch and folds. So the second timer, if you were going to set it, you would set it for 2 hours. And that timer would just let you know where you're at on your stretch and folds. But again, if you're using your baker's notes, you would just take note of the time and you can keep track of it that way. Whatever way you want to organize yourself to make sure that you are going to do at least the 3 rounds of stretch and folds at the 30, 60, and 90 minute increments. Okay, I'll see you in a few minutes. Welcome back. It has been 30 minutes. Now, one thing I do want to mention, I did say come back at 30, 60, and 90 minutes. Okay, well, what happens if you're a little bit earlier or a little bit later? That's fine. As long as you're leaving at least 20 minutes in between each of these rounds to give the dough enough time to stretch and rest after it's been stretched, that's fine. So what you're going to do once you come back for your first round is we are going to write, if you're using your baker's notes, you're going to take note of what time it is that you performed your first stretch and fold. So what you're going to do is you're going to need your bowl scraper and you're just going to need to wet your hands a little bit. And then just taking your dough scraper, you're just going to loosen the dough from the sides of the bowl. Now, to do your stretch and folds, it's easy. What you're going to do, grab your dough, both hands, you're going to stretch. We don't want it to tear. And then we're going to fold it over. I don't know if you've seen that movie Legally Blonde where they do like the bend and snap. Stretch and fold. I don't know. It's just kind of what I like to go through my head when I'm doing this. So anyway, we're going to stretch it, and we're going to fold it. And we're going to turn a quarter turn on the bowl. Wet your hands again. Stretch and fold. Now you'll notice your first stretch and fold will be able to stretch further than what your fourth one is going to do, and that's fine. We're just doing it, and we're allowing the dough to build up its resistance. We're just going to stretch and then fold. So once you've done 4 around your whole bowl, quarter turn, after each stretch and fold, you're then going to put your cover back on, and you're going to allow this to sit for an additional 30 minutes. And I will see you then. Welcome back. It is time to do our second set of stretch and folds. So we are going to take off our lid. Again, we are going to wash our, wet our hands. Grab your bowl scraper and just gently pull the dough away from the sides of the bowl. And then we are going to stretch. This is why I like to have the towel underneath, so that the bowl doesn't end up just slapping on the counter, but definitely expect it to do that. Okay, so again, we're gonna stretch and fold. Quarter turn, wet the hands. We are going to see there's not that much stretching anymore, so that's good. We're going to stop here because it has reached its point of resistance. We are going to add our lid. We are going to allow this to sit for an additional 30 minutes, and then I will show you what it is looking like, and we will do our third and potentially final set of stretch and folds. I'll see you in a minute. Welcome back. It's been another 30 minutes since our last set of stretch and folds. Now I did go and already write down the time that this is that I'm doing this last set. Now, one thing that I did forget to mention last time is when you are doing your second set of stretch and fold is your first opportunity if you were to do inclusions. That's the first time that you could include them. Now, if this is your first loaf of bread, don't bother with inclusions. Just bake the bread as it is without adding anything extra. Because once you start adding inclusions in, that can also alter some of your bulk fermentation. For example, cinnamon, if you were to put cinnamon in, cinnamon has antimicrobial effects. That means that the cinnamon can actually go and interfere with the microbes in your bread. So if you were adding something like cinnamon, you would want to do this at the second opportunity that you're going to have to add inclusions. Other things that you would want to be careful with if you were adding would be garlic. Now, from what I remember, it really depends on how the garlic was processed as to how it's going to work. Raw garlic doesn't work as well as what roasted garlic does, from my understanding. So just know that the inclusions are going to make a difference in your final overall loaf of bread. Okay, but just in case you've made a couple loaves, you want to try working with the inclusions, during the second set of stretch and folds would be the first time that you could add them. Keep in mind, I will definitely be doing a video in the future on just different ways that you can make inclusion loaves. Okay, enough about that. So we are going to do our final set of stretch and folds. Again, you're going to just dampen your hands. Take your bowl scraper and just lift the dough from the side of the bowl. You don't necessarily have to, but we want to make sure that we actually aren't doing anything that is going to potentially tear the dough. And if you have noticed that you've teared the dough, just keep note of the amount of force or strength that you were using, and then just don't use that much. Okay, you're not really going to know when to not tear the dough until you kind of do, and then you know when to stop. Okay, but anyways, our last stretch, we're going to grab our dough, we're going to stretch it and then fold it over, quarter turn, grab all our dough. We are going to stretch it and fold, another quarter turn. Stretch and fold, and then our final quarter turn, and then we're just going to stretch it and fold it. Now, I personally am feeling the way that this dough is working. This feels good. It was getting to its point of resistance before we hit that final and the fourth stretch and fold in our rounds. Okay, I think that this is good the way that it is, and I'm going to stop here. If you feel that your dough isn't quite as strong as what maybe mine is looking, or as strong as what you feel maybe it should be, you can certainly come back in another 30 minutes and do a final fourth set of stretch and folds, but you really wouldn't want to do any more than what that fourth set would be. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we are going to, actually at this point, what I like to do, give me a moment. I'm just going to go wash my hands because I'm kind of sticky. Now, one other thing that I do want to mention in all of our equipment, I forgot this little guy. This is what sits in my drain. Ignore it, it's kind of gross right now. But this is kind of what catches when I wash all of the dough and whatnot off of my hands. This is what stops it from going down the drain. I just picked this up at my dollar store. It's definitely something to look into because we really want to make sure that we're not going to mess up our plumbing by getting our pipes all clogged up with sourdough. This will prevent that from happening. But anyway, what we're going to do at this point is we are going to take the temperature of our dough. Now, you could certainly be doing this all throughout the process, but I'm done my stretch and folds. I just want to know about where we're sitting. So I am just going to write that here. This is perfect. We are at 78.3 degrees. My desired dough temperature for this particular recipe is 78 degrees. So that's exactly where we want it to be. So let's just put our cover on here, and we're just going to write that somewhere on your baker's notes. I like to just do it under the little note side here. So what our recipe is telling us is at a temperature of 78 degrees, bulk fermentation should take about 4 hours. Now, I'm not going to be too reliant on the amount of minutes that are passing in that 4 hours. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to observe the dough. And I'm going to come back and show you, as I'm observing it, different things to look for to know that it's done. Okay? Because you might really just be selling yourself short by, okay, 4 hours, we're going to start shaping it and it's going to be done. Well, it might not be done though. I've had this process take as long as 7 hours with it still being at that 78 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, so you just want to make sure that you are keeping it around a consistent temperature just so that things stay at a consistent speed. We do not want to speed this up, or you're going to run the risk of over fermenting and then you're just going to make your focaccia, which is okay. I've definitely over fermented this dough on purpose with the plan of making it into a focaccia, and it worked fine. Okay, but I would like you to be able to make these into regular loaves of sourdough bread instead of having it overproofed. So I will come back when it is time to look for some of these different signals. These would include some bubbles being on the top of the dough. It would include also being able to see more bubbles kind of in the dough itself. We're going to be seeing how much of a dome shape it has. You're going to want to shake it. You're going to want to make sure that it's nice and jiggly. These are some of the things that you want to look for, not just how many minutes have elapsed. Now, I know that there is a process that I've seen some sourdough makers use, and I can't remember for the life of me what it's called, but basically they just take a little bit of their dough, they put it in a small container, and that shows them how much that it is risen. Again, let's not sell ourselves short. You can certainly use that as another technique on learning how to read your dough, but that's not something that we would necessarily want to rely on. So enough about that. I will see you back here after a couple hours when it's going to be showing different signs that our bulk fermentation is complete, and it's going to be time to rest our dough. Now, keep in mind that this is not going to be baked today. Once we have rested and shaped and everything, we are then going to allow the dough to sit in the refrigerator to cold retard, it's called, and then I'm going to be baking it with you tomorrow morning. Okay? But that's okay, we're getting ahead of ourselves. I will see you here in a couple hours to show you what bulk fermentation looks like when it is complete. All right, so it has been just under 5 hours, and I believe my bulk fermentation is complete. And I'm going to tell you what you need to look out for. So first off, our dough has definitely risen. And if we look, we can see that our dough is kind of domed on the top. If we give the bowl a shake, she's jiggly, it feels kind of airy. If you look on the top, like right here, we definitely have a bubble. There's a couple of different smaller bubbles on the top. That is a good sign. There's also a poke test that we can do. So what you're going to do is you're going to take a damp finger, not too wet, and you're literally just going to poke the top of your dough, going in maybe ½ an inch. And you're just going to observe what happens. So if you notice that your indentation is slow to spring back, but it still leaves a little bit of an indentation, that is a sign of good fermentation, and your bulk fermentation would be complete. If you notice when you push it down and you lift your finger, it springs back immediately, it's not done. It needs more time. If you do it and you notice and the indent just stays and there's absolutely no spring back, chances are you have overproofed your dough and it's time to make a focaccia. But everything on here is feeling good. So what we're going to do is we're going to dump out the contents of our bowl. We're going to divide it into two. We're going to loosely shape them, and then we're going to allow the dough balls to rest for 35 minutes, and that is going to be called our bench rest. So let us grab our bowl scraper here, and we're just going to scrape the bowl. Now, when it comes to cutting your loaves, separating your loaves, you certainly could throw this on a scale and make sure that they are the same size, but I personally just like to kind of eyeball it. Perfect. So everything dumped out. Move this out of the way. Perfect. So again, I like to just work with my damp hands. You're going to take your bench scraper. You're going to eyeball half. And you're just going to take one of these and just move it off to the side. Okay, so now you have your dough, and we're going to do our pre-shaping. So this is not going to be the final shape, just the pre-shape, and they're both going to be formed into rounds. So you're going to take your bench scraper and you're going to take a clean, damp hand. And you just want to take and cup the side of your dough. You're going to take your bench scraper and you're just going to push it around. If you don't want to use the bench scraper after you've given it just a little bit of tucking those ends underneath, you can just use your hands. So just clean down hands, and you're going to take your one hand like this against the bottom. The other one, you're going to just kind of do this motion. So you're going to push it in and under, pulling it towards you, just creating a little bit of surface tension. So once you are in your pre-shape, it's good, and we're just going to put it to this side. If you notice that your dough is sticking to your bench scraper too much, just dampen it a little bit. So let's grab our other loaf, and notice I did not put any flour down. I'm just using just a little bit of water. So grabbing your bench scraper and just kind of pulling it around and tucking it underneath. And then you can just do a couple rounds without the bench scraper as well, just to give it a little bit more of a shape. So I am happy with the way that this has turned out. I am just going to allow both of these to rest for 35 minutes, and I'll see you back here to show you what we do next. So I just did our whole shaping step without hitting record. That is the second time I've done this during this tutorial. That's okay. I'm going to just re-show you what I just did. So at this stage, you want to get your proofing baskets ready. Whatever you're using, if you're using the bannetons, you would get these ready. If you were just going to be using a bowl with a cloth in it, you would get it ready in the same way. So you're just going to take your rice flour. Again, if you don't have rice flour, that's fine. You could just use all-purpose or bread flour, whatever you have. Okay, but again, the rice flour is just something that is not going to be absorbed by the bread in the same way as what the bread or the all-purpose would. But again, just use what you have. So you would just want to take and give a nice sprinkling on the inside of both of your bannetons. And then what you're going to do, we will reshape this one. This is our Batard loaf. So what you would start by doing is you would take your rice flour, put a little bit on the top. You would just kind of rub that in, take off any excess. You would then take your bench scraper, lift it up, and then you would put, so the sticky side is up and the part that has the flour is then on the table. So next what you're going to do is you just want to lightly stretch this out. We don't want to be too rough with our bread loaf, but we also don't need to be too gentle. Now, I wouldn't suggest necessarily going and taking like your rolling pin to flatten this out, because I've seen some people do that. I feel that that's going to damage some of what we just did, and if it can be avoided, we certainly don't need to do it. So you can be a little firm, but still wanting to be slightly gentle here. You will definitely figure it out as you go. Okay, now this is also the second opportunity that you would have if you were wanting to do some inclusions. You would just sprinkle them in here, kind of fold it over like a letter, sprinkle some more inclusion, and then just roll it up. But again, I will have a video coming up shortly on how you can make inclusion loaves. So, okay, here, let's go this way. So what we're going to do is we have a little bit of a square. Is you're going to take one side and bring it to the middle and just gently push it down. If you notice things are getting a little bit too sticky with your dough, you would just want to lightly dampen your hands. So take your other side, pull it over, just like that. So then what I like to do is take the end opposite and just kind of roll them a little bit so you have a bit of a triangle or a V. And then take this little edge away from you and I want you to flip it over. And then you're just going to keep doing that. You're going to kind of push away from you, but pulling at the same time because we're wanting to start creating some tension as we're rolling it. So kind of push it away and bring it in. Away and bring it in. Perfect. And then now you have just a nice little loaf like this. And we are just going to then, what do I want to do? I want to take a little bit of water and I want to create a little bit more tension on the surface of this. So I'm just going to push it away from me a little bit with my bench scraper. Taking your thumbs on the top of the loaf, pushing your hands down, but bringing them in. And it's just going to start to create a little bit more tension on the surface and help it smooth out. You don't want to go so far as you start tearing the dough, but if you do tear the dough, then you know where the point is that you need to not go past, right? So even when we make mistakes, there are still opportunities to learn. So once you are happy, I'm not particularly sure my dough is happy with me, but that will teach me to forget to record. So once you have it in the shape that you are happy with, you're going to take your bench scraper, you're going to pick up your dough, and then you're going to place so the seam side is up and just drop it in your banneton. So then what I like to do is just take any of these, kind of where that crease is in there. So I will take a little bit away from me and just kind of tuck it over. And you just want to keep pinching the dough together so that it sticks. And then you can go and grab from like opposite sides. If you wanted to like stitch your dough shut like that, you can do that. Perfect. So just grab a little bit and push it over. Excellent. So once everything is shaped the way that you want it to, all of your seams are closing up. Perfect. This one's good. Okay, so once you have everything closed, your seams are good, you're just going to put a lid on it. We are going to set it to the side. So we are going to shape our boule shape now. So you would sprinkle a little bit of the flour on top of here, rub it in, just so that you don't have too much, and then grab your loaf. And again, you're going to put the side with the flour on the table with the sticky side up. So for this one, what you would do is you would, let's just kind of stretch us out a little bit. Okay, so let's take two opposite sides and we are just going to cross them over into the middle. You're now going to take two opposite sides here, same thing, cross them over into the middle. And just keep working in opposite directions like that until you have your round shape. So then what I like to do is we will grab it and we are going to allow it to sit seam side down. And you essentially do want to leave this for a couple minutes, and this is going to allow those seams to start fusing together. So once it's sat for just a few minutes, we can do our final shaping on this side of it. So You're going to take, again, some hands with some water on them. And this time, you're going to go kind of with your hands like this, kind of just at the base of your circle. You're going to take this hand and just kind of go around and bring it back. Just around and bring it back. And this is just going to create that tension on the top. Okay? I had already shaped these before, so I don't really want to do too much more, or else I'm going to maybe make them angry. So what we will do now is grab the bench scraper, grab your dough, and then just gently place it in the bowl. You're going to then see if any of these seams on here need to be pinched shut. Do so if you find any. If you find that they are actually just sticking together good enough because you let it rest before you started that final shaping, that's fine. So what we are going to do is grab another shower cap. If you don't have these, you can just use plastic wrap. These are now going to sit in the refrigerator overnight, and I will come back in the morning and bake these with you. Good morning. It is now the next day, and it is time to bake our loaves. Now, it is pretty early because it is going to be hot here today, so I want to get this baking done as soon as I possibly can. So what we need to do is we need to preheat our oven. Now, if you are using a cast iron Dutch oven, you're going to want to make sure that you are preheating that in your oven. If you are using any type of enameled roaster, I would suggest not heating it up, okay, and then just put it in cold when you're putting in your bread. But if you're using cast iron, we do definitely want to heat that up. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take both pieces of my Dutch oven and I'm going to put them in my oven. Now I have my racks on the 2 lowest that it can go, just because if I have them any higher, my bread ends up almost touching the top element and kind of burning a little bit, and that's not really what we want. So we're going to start by putting our cast iron Dutch oven in our oven. Perfect. So once that is in, now we're just going to turn it on. Now our recipe is saying that you need to cook yours at 450 degrees. So that's what I'm going to suggest that you preheat your oven to. I've made this recipe a bunch of times, and I know with my particular oven that 430 is my good spot. So I'm going to set mine there, but I'm definitely going to suggest you start at the 450 and then just move down if you feel that you need to. So we are going to allow this to heat up for 30 to 40 minutes, and then I will see you back here and I will show you how we are going to prepare our loaves for baking. Our oven has now been preheated and it is time to bake our loaf. So this is what we're going to do. You want to remove it from the refrigerator, and then now we are going to put it on one of our slings, and then we are going to do a little bit of a score on the top. So what I'm going to do is you would put your sling over the top like that. Again, if you didn't have one of these slings, you would just take a large piece of parchment paper and then put it over the bottom. Place your, I like to grab this one with my right hand, take my left over top and flip it. And you're just going to carefully flip it over like that. And we're just going to lift our banneton off. There is a little bit of flour on the top of here, so I just like to wipe that off. Now, if you were wanting to do a bit of a decorative patterned type score, you could definitely just take some new flour, take your sprinkler, sprinkle the flour over top, and then put in your score, and it will be easier to see. But I'm not too worried about that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do a simple X score across this loaf. So Yeah, I do want to use this one. So all we'll do is kind of where you want to go. You want to enter in about half an inch. So we're going to do it that way. And then I just want to do just kind of another one going the other way. Now, the reason that we would want to do this score is because we want to control the way that the steam is going to be rising and rising this loaf. Okay, so this is good. If you didn't do the score, what might end up happening is you could just blow out a side, because that's where your steam is going to build up and potentially escape. So I'm just going to move this here. Now we do want to fill out on our baker's notes what time we warmed up our oven, just to make sure that it has enough time to preheat for that 30 to 40 minutes. Okay, once you remove your cast iron Dutch oven out of the oven, there is a very specific way I'm going to recommend that you take off the lid. And that is to open it away from you. You do not need all of that steam hitting you. That is going to hurt. So we are going to then carefully take our sling and place it into our Dutch oven. And then you're going to take, let's just kind of put that in the center a little bit, 1 to 3 ice cubes, and just put that inside here. And that is going to help create the steam. I'll just do 2, but it's going to help create the crust. So you're going to put your lid on. We're going to return this to the oven for 20 minutes. So I will see you back here in 20 minutes when it is time to take off the lid and show you what it's looking like so far. Now that our first loaf is baking, I want to go over a little bit of storage with you. Now, you will see in a few minutes that I do go over how to freeze your loaves, but that's not the only way to store them, obviously. So I'm going to just show you what I do, and then you can see if it's going to work for you, and then determine what you want to do in your house. So it's my bread box. This is where I keep all of my bread when I'm not putting it in the freezer. So honestly, all I do, I just put the loaves directly in here. Now, mine did come with just this little paper liners to put in the bottom. I'm not sure if they're necessary, but all I do is I take my loaf that I cut off of, and then I just put cut side down on that paper. When the loaf is too big still to put cut side down, I will literally just push the cut side across, like against just the side of the bread box. Okay, and I find that that way is good. I haven't gotten any moldy loaves. I have stored them just in plastic bags, and I have had them go moldy that way. So if you can avoid it, definitely try to avoid it. I do know some people like to keep their bread in these paper bags. I have some of those, but I just can't even be bothered to try to use them when this works just as well. All right, so yeah, I just wanted to show you how I store my loaves when they are still fresh and just waiting to be eaten. Okay, so I'm going to see you in about 20 minutes when it's time to take off our lid and allow the first loaf to finish baking without a lid. Okay, I'll see you then. Okay, so we have been cooking for about 20 minutes, and this is our steam phase. So now we are going to again lift the lid open away from us to allow that steam. And then we can see our loaf so far. So if you notice, we are starting to brown. Now I will say I don't believe that I did my scores deep enough, but we're gonna see, because this is what we're getting so far. But so far this is definitely looking good. So what we're going to do now is we're going to bake it open for an additional, let's see. We are going to bake it for another 30 to 35 minutes. So I'm going to come back and look at this in about 25 minutes just to make sure that my top isn't getting too brown. But I do kind of prefer a bit of a deeper brown color myself when it does come to the crust of my loaves. But a lot of that will come to personal preference. All right, let's throw her back in the oven, and I will see you back here in another 30 to 35 minutes. All right, so we have been baking for another 30 minutes. And what I'm going to do now is we just want to make sure that this loaf has reached the proper internal temperature to ensure that it is cooked. So I like to just take my digital thermometer and perfect. We are over 205, which is exactly what we want. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move this out of the way. I'm going to bring this over here. Now, because I am going to be baking both of my loaves today, I'm going to throw my Dutch oven, both pieces, back in for an additional 20 minutes to allow these to heat up again, and then we will bake our second loaf. All right, so now all you need to do is take your loaf. You can hear just how crispy we are. Anyways, we are then just going to allow this to sit on a cooling rack for 1 to 2 hours before we are going to cut into it. So I will meet you back here in about 20 minutes when it's time to get our Batard ready to go into the oven. Okay, so our other Dutch oven is now preheated, and it is time to get our Batard loaf ready to go. So we are going to just start by taking off the plastic cover. Again, we're either going to use a piece of parchment paper, or we are going to use our sling. Same thing, you just want to carefully put the sling underneath. Grab it with, I like to use my dominant hand and put my non-dominant hand over top, but you can do it whichever direction you want, and then just flip it over. And then just carefully lift the banneton off. Now I'm just going to gently wipe off the flour that's on top because I don't really like to leave a lot of it on. So this time, now just so you know, I'm not big on the large decorative, super decorative scoring. I do more of a basic one. So there's that. Now, don't necessarily the ear. So the ear is the part that forms after you've scored it. Now, if you notice, this particular one does not really have that great of an ear. Just know a lack of ear doesn't necessarily mean anything. That has more to do with your scoring techniques than anything. Okay, so for this particular one, what I'm going to do is do kind of just like a C shape like this, and I like the way that it rises that way. So we'll go in about 1/2 inch, 45-degree angle. We are just going to go all the way around. Now, one thing you can do after you've done this initial slit is kind of just go in and just kind of cut the dough away a little bit more, and that will also encourage this ear to form. So what I'm going to do on the other side here is I'm just going to do some little V's, and they kind of end up looking like wheat when you're done. So I'm just going to use my other one, but you could certainly, whichever one, if you don't have either of these, remember, we can just use a paring knife. So I'm just going to go here. Wow, and got a little funky, but that is okay. This is just for me and my family. It's going to taste good. It doesn't need to be that beautiful. So let's just move this out of the way here. And we are just going to grab our Dutch oven. All right, and again, we are just going to open it away from us. So if there's any steam, it's not going to burn us in the face. And then we are just going to carefully place this sling into here. And again, we're just going to put in 1 to 3 ice cubes is what has been suggested. Onto the side there. You're going to put our lid back on, put it in the oven for 20 minutes. And then I'll be back to show you what this one is looking like and when it's time to take off our lid. And then just make sure you fill out on your baker's notes what time it is that you put it in for this steam step, and then again fill it out for our venting step. But anyways, I'll see you back here in a few. Okay, so we have now been baking for 20 minutes and it is time to take off our lid, opening it away from us. This is what we've got so far. You can see that those little scores that we did on the side are kind of starting to expand. We can see our ear is starting to form, and there was a nice expansion there. This is looking really, really good so far. We are going to throw it back into the oven and allow it to cook for another 30 to 35 minutes, and I'll show you what we look like then. And just make sure if you are using your baker's notes that you are taking note of the time. Welcome back. I just took our second and final loaf out of the oven. I'm just going to check it with our thermometer. Excellent. We are at over 205 degrees, which is exactly what we are wanting. So we are just going to move this out of the way. And then you just want to remove your loaf off of your sling. And then we are going to just allow this to cool on a cooling rack. Now, we are going to wait at least 2 hours before we are going to be cutting into these loaves. I know, that seems ridiculous, but hear me out. We have just spent, 3 days baking this bread. If you cut into your loaf before it is cooled down, there's a cost. And the cost is actually that loaf of bread. So what ends up happening when we cut into this before it's had a chance to cool, so 1 to 2 hours, what could end up happening is the steam that's built up in there, it all ends up escaping because you cut it open, and then you are left with a dense and just kind of gross and gummy loaf that is not going to be any good. Now, If, for example, though, you were planning on serving this with like a nice soup or stew in the winter, and you knew that you were going to end up using the whole loaf, you could do that. But just know you're not going to be able to save much if you do cut into it before it's had a chance to cool off. Now, once these do cool off, I will be coming back just to show you what the crumb looks like. But I want you to keep something else in mind. This is how my bread's going to look. My bread might not look anything like your bread. Maybe I misread my bulk fermentation clues and these are completely overproofed. That does not mean that yours is going to. This is a good, sound recipe that if you follow the instructions, it will work. And if it doesn't work, that is because we did something wrong, not the recipe itself. But if we are using our baker's notes, we will have an idea of maybe where things did go wrong or different steps that we would want to make sure that we would include in our next loaves. That's how I found out that with this particular one, when I make it, the coil folds do a really, really good job. Not the coil folds, sorry, those slap and folds that we did at the beginning do a really good job of building strength later on. Now, I know that this video is probably going to be about an hour and a half long. I've been editing it as I've been filming, and that's about where we're going to be. But just know, I am going to have everything in chapters, so you can always come back. Say you need a refresher on shaping, just head to that chapter. Say you forget what Autolyse or even a Levain is, because those words have slipped my mind, just go to those chapters. Just remember that this information is going to be here for you for whenever you need it. But perfect. I will see you back in a couple hours when it is time to cut these open and see what we've got. So we have now waited a little over 2 hours and it is time for us to do the crumb shot. That is literally what it is called. I did not make it up. Okay. So another thing that I do want to mention, I know this video is going to be like 2 hours long. It's fine. There are groups on Facebook that you can join, sourdough groups, and I'm in a couple different ones, and in there, certain people will upload pictures of the crumb to get it evaluated by like a whole group of people. So that is also another suggestion on something that you can do when you're learning on how to read the crumb. So we're going to start first by cutting this open. Okay, so now we are going to open our bread, and this is good. So judging by, let me just kind of cut these two pieces in half here. Now, judging by my little chart that I'm using, I would say for the most part, everything is consistent, it is even. This is showing signs of nice fermentation. Even if there's no ear on the top, the inside, this is what we are looking for, okay? So now let's do the other one. So now let's grab our other one and see what we've got. But just listen. It is nice, it is crispy. Okay, so let's cut open the center and see what this one looks like. Okay, perfect. And then this one is the exact same. So this is perfect. So we do, oh, there we go, have some, just a couple bigger holes, but it's okay. They're not too big. These are just nice little chambers for the butter to go in. The inside of both of them it's feeling quite nice. There's some spring. It's not feeling gummy in any way. I would say that those two loaves were successfully fermented. So if you do follow my bulk fermentation suggestions, this is where we got to. Now let's go over some different notes and different suggestions that I have for you. No substitutions in this video, just some more suggestions. So some storage options. How I like to keep my bread after I have baked it. If I've baked a couple loaves, I actually like to throw some in the freezer so that I can have some at a later date. Now, truth be told, if you do that, just know that your crust will not be as crispy as it once was. But personally, I'm not offended by that. I don't like when it gets really, really crispy personally. So freezing it is just fine. The way I freeze it is I wait until it is completely cooled down, usually the day after I've baked it. And then I will wrap it in a couple layers, 2 layers of plastic wrap, and then 2 layers of tin foil. The reason that I do it like that is just, if you go into restaurants, generally their like frozen desserts, we'll say, are under layers and layers of plastic wrap. That's kind of where I went with this. I wanted to keep some layers of plastic and the tin foil in between my bread and just the cold air of the freezer. So I do know that there are ways that you can refresh loaves that have been done in that way. A quick Google search will help you out if that's what you want to do. The ambient temperature is going to make a difference. This is why it is important to know the temperature of your starter, of your flour, and all of that. So, for example, say it's really cold in your house. Well, you could just warm your water up, and that would help bring the temperature of your sourdough up. Now, you want to make sure that you always read the dough, not the clock. Repeat after me. I'm going to read the dough, not the clock. Okay? Now, keep in mind, if you want to check out that blog article, I do have a chart, a bulk fermentation chart that you can go by time-wise if you still want to have a little bit of an idea of how long it's going to take. But again, I would just make sure you have enough time during the day and you won't have to rush anything. I'm also going to suggest that you learn how to read the crumb. In the blog article, I will also have a download in there of just a different crumb chart, the one that I personally like to use. Reading the crumb will let you know what differences that you need to make in your mixing or in your bulk fermentation process. And just remember, if you are keeping track on these baker's notes, like for example, this particular recipe is baked at 450. Well, I figured out that my particular oven, and I always use that same cast iron Dutch oven, my loaves turn out better when my oven is at 430. I wouldn't have necessarily remembered that unless I wrote it on my sheet. But that's just how we improve. Anyways, don't forget to hit the like button if you've liked this video and maybe share it with anyone else who you think might enjoy it. Consider subscribing to the channel so that we can spend more time together and that you don't miss future videos. I just want to say thanks for stopping by today, and I'll see you next time.